This week on Quadriga, after the coup, Egypt on the brink. Dozens of people have died as supporters of Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood protest against the overthrow of their democratically elected president by the military. He was pushed out after just a year in office. Huge numbers of Egyptians had turned out in Tahrir Square demanding his resignation. They accused him of authoritarianism and steering the country towards an Islamist dictatorship. After days of protests, the army stepped in. Morsi was arrested, the army appointed a new president and promised elections in 6 months' time. Positions have become entrenched between those who oppose and those who support the military coup. Does Morsi's overthrow mark a new start for democracy, or has it paved the way for a civil war? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Former President Mubarak ruled Egypt for 3 decades before the Egyptian people and the military showed him the door. It took his successor, Mohamed Morsi, only 1 year to suffer the same fate. So, leaving Egypt again in a very difficult situation, in a delicate situation where everybody is wondering and asking, where is the country headed? And that's exactly what I will be asking my 3 guests, all who have been following events in Egypt very closely. Welcome to Hamid Abdel-Samad, who is a German-Egyptian political scientist and the author of several best-selling books such as The Downfall of the Islamic World. 3 prominent Islamic sheikhs have recently issued death threats against him, accusing him of insulting Islam and the Prophet. Jan Kuhlmann is a freelance German journalist specializing in the Middle East and the Arab world. He has reported for the DPA news agency and now works for a variety of newspapers, magazines and radio stations. And Tom Göller, who is a seasoned journalist who in the past has worked for the BBC, the German public broadcaster ARD, and the Egyptian monthly Egypt Today. He now works as a freelance journalist and political analyst of US and Middle Eastern affairs. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Indeed, very delicate times in Egypt these days, Hamid Abdel-Samad. And before we talk about the current situation, let's backtrack a few days, in a sense, when the military stepped in. And a lot of people inside and certainly outside Egypt are still wondering and debating whether the ouster of Mohamed Morsi amounted to a military coup, or was it just the military merely executing the will of the Egyptian people? What's your take?
Well, let me say it wasn't really a coup because he wasn't really a president. He seemed to be just a marionette of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was not making his own decisions but carrying out the agenda of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. That was the core problem. And we should not forget that Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brothers made a coup first against democracy, against the state of law, tried to undermine the institutions of the country, tried to Islamize everything in Egypt. And they were dragging the economy of the country towards chaos. And therefore, masses of people took to the streets, and the army couldn't just watch everything without doing anything. The army had to intervene. The Muslim Brotherhood were trying to hijack Egypt. And this action, from my point of view, is just a trial to free the hijacked Egypt and bring it back to its people.
But at the same time, we're talking about a president who in June 2012 was elected with 51% of the vote. So the 51% whose votes, if you will, whose voices have been robbed, what do you say to that?
There is a great difference between legal and legitimate. And he was legally elected. That's the process of election. But legitimacy is a long-term process. He has to govern according to the democratic rules. He didn't. He has to be a president of all Egyptians as he vowed, but he didn't. And he has to respect the institutions, but he didn't. He allowed his supporters, his militias, to siege the Supreme Court, the Supreme Constitutional Court, to avoid a judgment against him and against his constitution. He allowed his militias to kill peaceful demonstrators in front of the presidential palace early in December last year, and he lost the legitimacy exactly by doing this. Therefore, we should always differentiate between legally elected and legitimate, because democracy is not a Catholic marriage where a wife is not allowed to divorce, although the husband is alcoholic and he's raping her every night.
Well, Jan Kuhlmann, democracy is not a Catholic marriage, says Hamid Abdel-Samad. But what would you say? A lot of people are saying and debating whether this was a military intervention versus a popular intervention. What's your take?
No, it was clearly a military intervention, and I'm kind of surprised that you were praising the military so much, because I remember after Mubarak fell down, we also had the military step in, and you were much more critical at this time of the military. And what we clearly can see now is that the military is exactly doing what it did 2 years ago. So I'm surprised that you're praising the military so much. But anyway, it's a military intervention because we had a free elected president, and just saying he doesn't have, or he didn't have legitimacy is saying that the people didn't give him his vote. He had the legitimacy. So he was the free elected president, so it was a clear military intervention, which does not mean that the military intervention didn't have legitimacy, because there were so many people going on the streets, so many people just wanted to get rid of Morsi. It's a military intervention, but it had legitimacy, that is for sure. For me, the main problem is in the whole process, I mean, we can talk for hours and days and years about the question whether it was a military coup or not. For me, the main problem is that the main problem Egyptian policy had in the past was that you have such a deep that you're not bringing together the both sides. The religious parts on the one hand and the non-religious parties on the other side. So you have such a deep rift between the two sides. And this rift now is even larger. So I don't see how you can bring the two sides together. And Egypt needs this if it's really want to go towards democracy.
And Tom Guller, indeed, a lot of people are saying the Egyptian society is even more polarized today than it was a year ago. A lot of people are fearing that Egypt might be headed into the direction of a civil war. Do you think those fears are exaggerated?
Yes, I do. And in those days, I feel even like being an Egyptian, because in my heart both sides are beating, so to speak. I couldn't disagree more with what you have said before, calling the elections not legitimate, and you calling a coup d'etat, which is a coup d'etat, a military intervention. Well, how would you call it if the German army, Bundeswehr, would do the same here? You would call it a military intervention or what? We know why this is not called a coup d'etat, because the United States, the President of the United States, refrained from calling it a coup d'etat, and this has a reason, because the label coup would mean that then the US aid for Egypt would have to be put on hold. But maybe the United States and the Western world can think about what this would mean for themselves, not calling what it is a break of law in Egypt. And they would betray their own values if they would stick to your term, calling it just or downplaying it as a military intervention to save what? To save democracy? This is ridiculous, because I'm certainly not, I'm well known that I'm not a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, but I am a strong supporter of democratic values. And once you are elected, the military has to stay out in every country. What would you say if Mr. Erdogan in Egypt, in Turkey, would have the same fear? Also, the Turkish army has a history in coup d'etats. Would you this then call a justified military intervention? We have to be very, very careful about those downplaying arguments and stick to what we experience now in Egypt. We experience a massive problem about how to define democracy. And democracy is the will of the majority of the people. And the majority of the Egyptian people voted or elected Morsi as president a year ago. And this is not negotiable, right?
So let's pick up on what Hamid Abdel-Samad earlier said, though, about the legitimacy and the lost legitimacy of President Morsi. Do you also think, a lot of people said, yes, he was elected with 51% of the vote, but then in November he issued a decree granting himself extensive powers and turning off a lot of people in the process. A lot of people point towards that power-grabbing move, if you will, as a turning point in the perception of Mohamed Morsi within Egypt. What would you say?
Yes, but on the other hand, we also had in December another referendum, 6 months later, or from our perspective today, 6 months ago. The Egyptian people again voted with a huge majority for the new charter, in which, you like it or not, but in which Islamic law, for example, was incorporated and so forth. Yes, I understand that there is a huge mass of Egyptians that is upset, or was upset, about President Morsi. We have this Tamarot charter, 22 million Egyptians signed for that Morsi should step down. Maybe he lost in the past few days before he was ousted the general view about how he is received by his own people. However, he was put under such an enormous pressure that how can you make clear decisions if the military sets you an ultimatum? Pardon me, where do we live? What kind of state is that? This is absolutely unacceptable by Western standards. I'm not talking about general standards, certainly not by Saudi standards. Yes.
Well, Hamid Abdel-Samad, many Muslim Brotherhood leaders are now in custody or in hiding, and a lot of supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood are very angry and frustrated at what they perceive to be the illegitimate ouster of Mohamed Morsi. What would you say to these supporters who say, listen, a year ago I went to the ballot box, I went through the democratic means, I cast my vote for Mohamed Morsi, he was elected, and now the president is gone due to a military coup. What would you say to a Muslim Brotherhood supporter?
I will tell them, I understand your anger, but I think you got democracy wrong, because democracy doesn't mean that the majority has the right to do everything and just grab the power to itself. You, Muslim Brotherhood, had a chance to make a plural Egypt, to start a real democracy, and you missed your chance. You got it, and you missed the chance. Now you have the chance to come back and be a part of a new government, not determine everything from above, not Islamize the constitution and the society against the will of the Copts, of many women and the liberal sides in Egypt. Democracy means to negotiate with different groups and to get a compromise, and they were not able to achieve a compromise because their project is the state, the theocracy state. Their project was not democracy and plural, and I'm telling them, if you are threatening me today of a civil war, then you already lost every legitimacy you have. It cannot be that the leaders of the Muslim Brothers are saying, if Morsi will not come back, we will have the Algerian scenario, we'll have the Syrian scenario, and there will be car bombs exploding everywhere. What kind of democracy is that? That is showing that they have been hijacking Egypt, and they cannot live with it now.
A lot of people are saying it sets a dangerous precedence that the military would and will step in every time, if you will, a significant portion of the public is displeased with politics. We have that in other countries as well, and he's only been in power for a year, and a lot of people are saying we should have let this thing run its course. We should have given him a chance for a few more years to establish himself.
Well, it's an exceptional time, and exceptional times need exceptional procedures and measures. And Egypt's democracy is still young and fragile and need to be protected. I'm the last one to defend the army.
You think a coup d'etat protects democracy? You cannot be serious saying this on air. Look, I mean, this election had a clear outcome, and this is democracy. You cannot define democracy as you like it. You have to deal with results everywhere, either in Europe or in the Arab world. And look, if this shall be an example for the Arab world, Right. So why not let, as you said, Ali, let it run, let it go, and even yes, I see mistakes Mr. Morsi did, but why not give the people a chance to confront him with the mistakes? Why to intervene with military?
They did. Millions of people, more than those who elected him, went to the streets and protested against him. And so, we can talk about. Let me finish my argument, please. We have been talking about a country that didn't reach the standards of democracy yet, which can enable us to set such standards like the army cannot intervene now. We are now setting the ground for democracy. And the Muslim Brotherhood were the first who turned against all the rules of democracy. We cannot wait 3 more years. If you are a sick person and you made a contract with a doctor, and after 1 year you notice that your health is deteriorating more, you cannot say, I will wait 3 more years, you might die. And Egypt was dying, Egypt was bleeding out, and the people were intervening, and the army had no other choice. It was not the plan of the army. The army was forced by the will of the people to intervene. And yes, now, if we want to set real standards, then we have to roll back and start by the constitution that the Muslim Brotherhood were manipulating. We need a strong institution that gives power to the institutions of the country, not to persons, not to the president, not to the prime minister. And that is the thing that will prevent the next government to turn against democracy and prevent the army to intervene again.
Well, the next government has big problems on its hands, problems that the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi in particular did not tackle, and many people blamed him for it. Many people are still saying poverty, corruption, and unemployment, social problems run rampant in Egyptian society. Do you think it was a mistake on the part of Morsi not to tackle those first and foremost problems?
Well, one thing is for sure that really if you look what went wrong in the last year since he came to power, it was mainly his fault, or the fault of his party and of the Muslim Brotherhood, that he actually failed. There's no discussion about it. I mean, he was in power, so he's responsible for what happened. But still, I must say, it's really black and white if you just blame only the Muslim Brotherhood for everything which went wrong in Egypt in the last 12 months or even longer, because I mean, the situation is not so black and white. It's much more complex, and if you can see that there are a lot of forces within Egypt who were really working against democracy, the old guard. It was the constitutional core which got rid of the freely elected parliament. You can see now, like a wonder, just in a few days, all of a sudden, oil and gas are back in Egypt. All the problems, the police is back on the streets, security is back on the streets. So you can really clearly see that there were a lot of people who tried to boycott the whole process towards democracy. And even, I must say, also the opposition parties, they didn't play a very good role in the whole situation. They didn't have a clear program.
They were not empowered.
They weren't unified. They didn't manage to build up any kind of structures. And one thing is for sure, I mean, if you have elections, if there are really going to be elections, and I really doubt it. I'm completely with you. I don't see the military leading the country towards democracy. And for me, if I didn't say it clearly, it was a coup as well. I just said it had some kind of legitimacy from the people. If there are elections, I'm pretty sure that it won't be the oppositional parties who benefit from it. But the Muslim Brotherhood still will be strong. The old guard probably will be much stronger than it was in the past. And I think one of the big winners in the whole situation right now are the Salafis. I mean, look at the Hizb an-Nur, the Salafi party. They're doing a very, very smart job. And they will be, I mean, in the last elections, they have already got something like 25% of the votes, even more. They will be much more stronger. I don't see how the military, which definitely is not interested in democracy, will lead the country to democracy. They are repeating all what they did after Mubarak was ousted. You have violation against human rights. 50 people were killed, and it's a clear indication that it was the military who killed them. even if there was a provocation. I mean, it's no reason to kill 50 people unarmed. I don't see Egypt moving toward democracy right now.
The military, says Jan Kuhlmann, is not interested in a real democracy in Egypt, and they've played a pivotal role ever since 1952, and they've certainly played a pivotal role this time around through the ouster and with the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. So, time to take a look at the role of the military in Egypt.
Egypt's military has long had the country firmly in its hands. Dictator Hosni Mubarak was just one of a series of army officers to rule as president. In 2011, it was the armed forces who helped push him out after huge protests in Tahrir Square. Army rule soon became unpopular. In June 2012, Mohamed Morsi beat the army's candidate to become president. A year later, it was again the army who stepped in to push him out. And again, they were celebrated as liberators by the crowds in Tahrir. Even when not holding political office, the army has always wielded massive power. It's the armed forces who receive the bulk of American aid, over $1 billion a year. And huge swathes of the economy are under the army's control. Everything from manufacturing food to parts of the tourist industry.
Well, Tom Göller, it's very clear that the military plays a very important and significant role in Egyptian politics. They have huge economic interests lying within the country that they have, if you will, consolidated over the decades. And of course, the 1.5 billion US
aid every year.
Dollar aid that they receive, which now is being called into question by a lot of lawmakers in the United States. In particular, US Senator John McCain is saying, perhaps it's time to rethink this aid that we're giving on an annual basis to the Egyptian military. What would you say?
Yes,
Is he right?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And it's not only him, it's also within the Democratic Party that we have a mind change. Didn't Barack Obama always call for a change? Yes, it's time for a significant change in U.S. politics, in Middle Eastern affairs, and not to constantly run into traps, old traps from old times, when, for example, the United States permanently supported all those regimes and old Mubarak, so to speak, because they thought and they sold it as he is an ally to the West. And we now learned that if you support those guys and those regimes, the people think you side with their despots, and the West cannot afford any longer to send signals to Egypt or other countries in the region that we side with the wrong guys. But we need strong signals that we side with those who stand up for democracy, for freedom, for liberty of speech, for equality of women. And certainly the Muslim Brotherhood, neither nor the Salafis stand for that. However, we need to give this region time to learn what democracy is. And this point, I'm with you. Coming back to the United States, yes, there is a change, a shift of opinion to wait, and maybe this is what I hope, support those forces in Egypt who can actually lead to a democratic system. And this is definitely to bring the military back into the garrisons. This is absolutely necessary, and the people need to decide what they want. And if they decide in a way the West doesn't like, so what the heck? That's their will, their free will.
And Abdel-Samad, the military seemed to have learned some lessons, at least, from the ouster of President Mubarak. Back then, they were themselves they took on the power. This time around, they said, we're only supervising the transitional period. General al-Sisi made it clear that he's not interested in running the country. Rather, he installed an interim president, Chief Justice Mansour. Do you think that's a wise move?
It has to come that way because they have seen in this 1 year they took power. They were confronted with the Egyptian people for the first time. They are not trained to deal with demonstrations, so they were shooting and were killing people, and this was, of course, harming their image among Egyptians. And the Egyptian people have a very emotional relation to the army, and they want the army to do the job it's assigned for, to protect the borders and take care of the security of the people, not to govern. And yet, when they are going back to the background, they still want to have the control because they have the power. And let's face it, this is the fact. It's the only institution in Egypt that really works right now. Every other institutions are damaged and are not disciplined. Even the Muslim Brotherhood, they were having this legend that they are the best organized force in Egypt. This proved to be fake. They are not really good organized and they couldn't run the country. Now the army wants to step back, control the things from the background, and I think it doesn't matter for the army if we will have a democracy or a dictatorship. All what the army needs is security, that the investors will come back, that the tourists will come back. That what the Muslim Brotherhood didn't do anything to do that. Therefore, it's easier for the democratic parties to cooperate with the army now and find a common ground, give the army the same privileges, and at the course of time, start to think about taking these powers away. Erdogan did it like this in Turkey, but after he made a economic change in the country, then he was having a popular support that enabled him to cut off the privileges of the party. Mohamed Morsi wanted to repeat what Erdogan did in 12 years in only 12 months, therefore he failed.
Well, it's going to take a bit longer to marginalize the Egyptian military from Egyptian politics, it seems. But the army also has shown a somewhat heavy-handed approach ever since this ouster of Morsi. More than 50 people just have been killed recently, Muslim Brotherhood supporters. Many people are irritated about this particular move, even though the facts differ depending on whom you ask. But do you think that the image of the military has been damaged?
Yes, I mean, we don't know the whole story yet. We have seen different videos. It depends who took the videos. All what I know is that the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood at that day said that they are gonna escalate tonight and they will take extraordinary procedures to free their president from the house of the Republican Guards. And at the same night, it came to that bloodshed. And I'm asking myself, who profits the most from that bloodshed? Who is staging this bloodshed? The army was shooting, there is a fact. But who started shooting? Who was provoking? Who shot first? And it's not only pro-Morsi demonstrators who died, also army officers were injured and killed in this. And this is taking us to the Syrian scenario. The Muslim Brotherhood in Syria were always saying, our hope is the brutality of the regime. Our hope is the brutality of the regime, and therefore they were also accused of killing civilians and saying it was the regime of Assad. And I think the Muslim Brothers also, they can do that. I trust the army to shoot at civilians. They did it before. But I trust the Muslim Brothers to make this conspiracy, to show the army in front of the world and in front of the Egyptian people as illegitimate. They are profiting the most from that. Therefore, they carry also at least 50% of the responsibility of what happened in front of this.
I think it's really interesting how you defend the military who has killed 50 unarmed people. That's really
unarmed people. How
for
do
me,
you know that they were not armed?
I have no idea how this can come.
No,
I will tell you.
You have to tell me where did you get this information that those people were not armed?
I will tell you. For me, I don't bring this together with any kind of road to democracy, really. This is Assad-like behavior, just killing people. And even if there had been some kind of provocation, and I'm pretty sure there was a kind of provocation, I mean, there are kinds of de-escalation, and I don't see that you really have to kill 50 people if you don't want to. And it was a clear warning shot towards the Muslim Brotherhood. This was the motive of the military. And if you really read carefully what journalists have collected from eyewitnesses who were at this place, even eyewitnesses who were against Morsi, even they say that it was the military who escalated the whole conflict. I mean, just read the New York Times, which really was praised even by Morsi opponents for his coverage of the whole story. I mean, you can read clearly, and there are clear indications that it was the army who escalated this, and it's really interesting how you are downplaying this.
I'm just saying we don't have the fact. I just said both were. Both were armed, and we saw the video that also they were shooting from this side. I went to the Egyptian army, and I was a soldier in the Egyptian army, and there is a law in Egypt: you don't get closer to a military base, and if you get closer to a military base, you are warned once. Then the soldier is shooting one in the air. If you don't get back,
so you're defending the rules of the Mubarak era.
No,
here. You're defending the rules of the Mubarak era. You're saying that the military was allowed to kill 50 people. That's not, for me, this is really not a democratic point of view.
No, I'm not justifying that. And those who killed should be brought to justice. I'm just saying who wanted this provocation. The Muslim Brotherhood exactly wanted that, and they said it hours before. We are going to storm the House of the Republican Guards to free our president, and they are not going to storm that with knives, but they were coming with guns, and they were shooting at the military, and the military was shooting back, and exaggerated. That's the truth. But you are saying they were shooting at unarmed people, and this is not true.
All of a sudden, you have a very clear vision of what happened. I wonder what kind of sources you have. Please, just read.
Both were shooting, but you are saying only the army was shooting.
And even the Morsi opponents, there are many Morsi opponents who just say it was the army who let it escalate. I mean, they have gone much further than you have gone.
And who let it escalate in Sinai and Minya and Alexandria? Who is sending the militias on the street to shoot at people? You know how many people were killed in Sinai and in Minya and Alexandria and all other provinces of Egypt? Was it the army too?
I think one thing is for sure, unfortunately, we will not be able to solve this case on this very show. But one thing that is for certain is that in the immediate aftermath of these killings, as a reaction, the Salafist Party has withdrew from the interim talks, as the Muslim Brotherhood have said that those talks are illegitimate to begin with. Do you see this transitional period already unraveling?
I'm afraid it is so. It is so. I mean, you just have to look at the timetable. Just within 4 weeks, there should be a new constitution. And there are 10 people, no one knows who's going to choose them, 6 judges, which is a clear hint that they are from the old guard. So 10 people which are not democratically, not elected by democratic votes, are going to give Egypt a new constitution in 4 weeks. I mean, look at Tunisia. They have been discussing for 2 years about the new constitution right now. It takes time. It's not a job you can do in 4 weeks, and it's not a job you can do in half a year. So it takes time. It needs a democratic basis. It needs an election basis. Otherwise, there's no way for me to have really a democratic state.
So, Mgala, according to the timeline set forth by interim President Mansour, the parliamentary elections are supposed to be held early 2014, and the presidential elections ought to be held immediately after the parliament convenes. Do you find this to be a realistic timetable?
It would be if it wouldn't be just an announcement. In this respect, we have to wait and see. But what for me is very important for the future of Egypt and how we can establish democracy there is to deal with the poor. Because this is where actually the Muslim Brotherhood failed also, not only to reach out to the intellectuals, but there are suburbs of Cairo where none of us would like to live. People live there like in caves. Whoever was there sees they live within garbage. The streets are filled filled, covered by garbage. The houses look like caves, and more than 6 million of the 20 million people in Cairo live like that, in inhumane situations. And the Muslim Brotherhood was the first, let me say, structured organization that tried, at least after the revolution, what is the revolution for, if not for improving the standards of living for the poor, right, like in the French Revolution. But they couldn't achieve anything to reach out to the poor, because they were also put under a lot of pressure from other groups to do this and that and so forth. Coming back to my point, whoever wants to gain power and rule the country in a decent way needs urgently to take care of those poor. If this doesn't work, if another regime will be elected or kind of elected or installed or whatever, and again reaches out for big money of the IMF, and there is the US also a lot to blame, and the European Union, who always looked only for big money, big investment, and again when I now see coming in that Egypt is showered by Gulf money, oh my God, this is the wrong direction. We need programs that reach out for the poor, and this will lead to, yes, an economy in Egypt that is not as fastly growing as the military would like to see, right? The military is interested in big money. But we need to win. We need means the people needs to win, or the new government needs to win the hearts and minds of the poor.
And you're referring to the $5 billion in grants and loans that have been promised by Qatar and Saudi Arabia to be pledged. Both countries who have supported, by the way, the move on the part of the military. Let's look at the transitional period once more. Ahmed Abdel-Samad, cabinet posts have been offered to the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis. But the Muslim Brotherhood has already said that they're going to reject the roadmap no matter what. Do you think that Egypt in the future is viable, the politics is viable if the Muslim Brotherhood are excluded?
They are not excluded. They have excluded themselves. They don't want to be a part of a solution because they want to determine the solution by themselves. But they're saying their elections
have been robbed. They're saying their votes.
Well, that's history. They can go and do whatever they want. Now we have new reality, and we got the reset button, and we got back to 2011 as Mubarak was dropped. So when we are starting everything anew, and they have chosen this way not to be a part of it. I think it's even more constructive that they are not a part of a government now, because they have been always the Trojan horse. If they enter any government, they are gonna make it unstable from inside, because they never learn to cooperate with others. They have been living in underground all their history, talking only to each other like in a dark cave, and now they cannot cooperate with people who have other ideological background. What we need now is a technocratic government. I agree with you that who should start working for the economy and for the poor people and try to show the young Egyptians a light at the end of the tunnel. That is what the Muslim Brotherhood missed to do, because they were busy trying to empower themselves instead of cooperating with the institution.
This is what they always stood for, actually, and this is what made them and makes them opponents of the oil-rich neighbors of Egypt. And this is why actually Saudi Arabia supports the military coup in Egypt, because it feared the success of the Muslim Brotherhood and its reach out to the poor, because this would also put an end to the other despot systems on the peninsula, Saudi peninsula. And we need to understand that the Muslim Brotherhood didn't really actually get a fair chance to do that job they actually wanted to do, because they were also forced to be busy with a lot of lawmaking, things, etc. This is how it works if you establish a new democracy, yes.
But there is a point that we are getting wrong here. We were thinking that the Muslim Brotherhood were doing a lot of things for the poor. I think they were just managing poverty. They did nothing to change the facts of poverty in Egypt. because they let me just finish. Let me finish.
Which is a lot.
No, let me finish my point.
Yes.
Because they didn't change their strategy of begging. So the whole economical concept of the Muslim Brotherhood was begging money from abroad and let the Egyptian people beg this money from them. They didn't help the poor to help themselves. They always wanted to have the poor depending on them. Therefore, they were giving them, especially short time before the election. And Saudi Arabia didn't intervene because it's fearing that the Muslim Brotherhood will do something for the poor. Saudi Arabia is fearing the power of the Muslim Brotherhood in the regional power, and Saudi Arabia was opposing Nasser because of that, and now it's opposing the Muslim Brotherhood. They missed the chance to do real economy, and therefore they are ousted from power.
They missed the chance, as Abdel-Samad, young Kuhlmann. What is your prediction for the next weeks and months to come in Egypt?
I'm not very optimistic about the next weeks and months. I think on the long run, still Egypt will hopefully find its way to democracy, but in the short run, I'm rather pessimistic. And one thing is for sure, if you want to have really something going towards democracy, the Muslim Brotherhood has to be involved. You just need them. There's a strong force. They are also capable of developing more towards democracy. Until now, they have only developed a kind of formal understanding of democracy. I think if there's a new generation coming, there are good chances that they're going to develop. It's not for sure that this is going to happen. No one knows, but at least there's a chance. But one thing is for sure, you need the Muslim Brotherhood. They're so strong, something like, no one can say exactly, but let's say about a quarter of the population probably is still pro-Morsi, perhaps a bit more, perhaps a bit less. But you need them and you have to involve them in the political process. If you don't do that, if you're not interested in doing that, if you're saying you have to byline them, then you are definitely not interested in democracy. This is for sure.
Do you expect more bloodshed, more violence along the way?
I'm afraid so. Yeah, I'm afraid so. I hope that there are some wise men within the Muslim Brotherhood who say, okay, we lost and we have to give it a second try in the interest of the country. I'm not sure if they're able to do that.
Your take?
I think the Muslim Brotherhood's chance is right now what they have missed before. This is now because they can gain even the hearts and minds of the West. Many in the West sympathize with them because we in the West think they have been ousted unfairly and not by democratic standards. And therefore, actually, I'm optimistic for Egypt, no matter how many victims we will have in the near future. But I think Egypt is on the right track.
Egypt is on the right track, says Tom Guller. Well, if this heated debate today was any indication at all as to how great the divide these days is in Egypt, then you know what obstacles and challenges lie ahead for that country. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation in Egypt. So I want to thank you out there for tuning in. I want to thank my guests for this very spirited and sometimes heated discussion. And I look forward to seeing you again at some point over the next few weeks. And I look forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga. Thanks for watching.